A woman vanishes without a trace. At first, it feels like a heartbreaking mystery. But as the truth begins to surface, something far more chilling is revealed. Behind the illusion of love was control, manipulation, and a plan that had been building all along. The 1985 murders of Derek Haysom and Nancy Haysom remain one of America's most haunting cases. What makes it so disturbing isn't just the brutality, but the conflicting stories of Elizabeth Haysom and Jen Söring, leaving the truth buried in doubt decades later. The murders took place on March 30th, 1985, in Bedford County, Virginia. Derek and Nancy Haysom were found days later in their home, brutally stabbed multiple times. The violence was extreme. Both victims had their throats cut, and the scene suggested a deeply personal attack rather than a random act of violence. There were no signs of forced entry, which immediately led investigators to suspect that the killer was someone the victims knew and trusted. Attention quickly turned to their daughter, Elizabeth, a college student known for her rebellious behavior and troubled relationship with her parents. She had been dating Jen Söring, a German exchange student with a high IQ and a background that, at first glance, seemed far removed from such a violent crime. However, their relationship was intense. Some described it as obsessive, even dangerous. The couple shared a bond that blurred the lines between love, control, and manipulation. Initially, both Elizabeth and Söring denied involvement. But as the investigation progressed, their stories began to unravel. They had been traveling around the time of the murders, claiming to have been in Washington, D.C., which they presented as an alibi. However, inconsistencies in their accounts raised suspicion. Eventually, the two fled the United States, traveling across Europe and Asia using stolen checks. Their flight only deepened the belief that they were involved in the crime. In 1986, they were arrested in England for fraud. It was during this time that Jen Söring made a shocking move. He confessed to the murders. His confession was detailed, describing the crime scene in a way that appeared to match the known evidence. He claimed that he killed Elizabeth's parents out of love for her, suggesting that she had been abused and that he wanted to protect her. He also believed that as the son of a German diplomat, he might receive a lighter sentence or serve time in Germany rather than the United States.
My father was a German diplomat, so I had a diplomatic passport with a diplomatic visa in it. So I thought I had diplomatic immunity. And I told her, the worst that will happen to me is that I will get sent back to Germany, and then they're going to put me in a juvenile prison. Under German law, I was still a juvenile. And I was willing to go to prison for her, in a German juvenile prison, for 10 years.
This confession became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. It painted a clear narrative. A young man, deeply infatuated, commits a brutal double murder to free his girlfriend from a troubled family life. Elizabeth, according to this version, was not the killer but an accomplice who helped plan the alibi and cover up the crime. However, the story did not end there. After being extradited to the United States and convicted of the murders, Söring began to change his story. He recanted his confession, claiming that it was false and made under pressure. He argued that he had confessed to protect Elizabeth, believing that she was more vulnerable and that he could shield her from harsher punishment.
I went into that police station when they brought me there, intending to give a false confession. We were taken into custody on June 5th, 1986. I was interrogated for a total of 9 times over 4 days. During my confession, I made a number of serious mistakes. I got Nancy Haysom's clothing completely wrong. I said she was wearing jeans, but in fact, she was wearing a long housecoat with pajamas. I told the police that I cut their throats, and I specifically said I did not stab them. But in fact, they were stabbed, I believe, 38 times. Again, the real killer would have remembered stabbing 2 people 38 times, but I got that wrong.
According to his revised account, he was not present at the scene at all and had no direct involvement in the killings. Elizabeth, on the other hand, took a different path. She pleaded guilty to being an accessory before the fact, effectively admitting that she had knowledge of the crime and helped facilitate it, but denying that she carried out the murders herself. Her version remained relatively consistent over the years. Söring killed her parents, and she helped him by creating an alibi and supporting him afterward. This divergence in their stories lies at the heart of the case's enduring mystery. Söring's shifting narrative raises serious questions. His initial confession was incredibly detailed, including descriptions of the crime scene that were not widely known at the time. Critics argue that such specificity would be difficult to fabricate, suggesting that his confession was genuine. Others, however, point out that false confessions are not uncommon, especially in high-pressure situations. They argue that Söring may have constructed his story based on information fed to him during interrogations or through media reports. Adding to the uncertainty is the forensic evidence, or lack thereof. At the time of the trial, DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today. The prosecution relied heavily on blood type evidence, noting that Söring's blood type matched samples found at the scene. However, blood typing is far less precise than modern DNA analysis and cannot definitively identify an individual. Years later, DNA testing was conducted on evidence from the crime scene. The results revealed the presence of unidentified male DNA that did not match Söring. This discovery fueled new theories about the case, suggesting that another person may have been involved. Supporters of Söring's innocence argue that this evidence undermines the original conviction and points to a possible third-party perpetrator. Despite these developments, the courts have consistently upheld the original verdict. Both Elizabeth and Söring spent over 3 decades in prison before being granted parole in 2019. Their release did not bring closure to the case. Instead, it reignited public interest and debate. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case is the psychological dynamic between Elizabeth and Söring. Their relationship has been analyzed extensively, often described as a toxic mix of dependency, manipulation, and shared fantasy. Some believe that Elizabeth was the dominant figure, exerting influence over Söring and possibly manipulating him into confessing. Others see Söring as the primary actor, driven by obsession and willing to sacrifice everything for love. Elizabeth's claims of abuse by her parents add another layer of complexity. She alleged that her mother was physically and emotionally abusive, and that her father was aware but did nothing to stop it. If true, these claims could provide a motive for the murders. However, there is limited independent evidence to support these allegations, and some investigators have questioned their credibility. Söring's defenders often point to his intellectual background and lack of prior violent behavior as reasons to doubt his guilt. They argue that his confession was a calculated but misguided attempt to protect Elizabeth, not an admission of actual guilt. They also highlight inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, including the absence of a murder weapon and the lack of conclusive forensic evidence tying him to the scene. On the other hand, those who believe in his guilt emphasize the brutality of the crime and the detailed nature of his confession. They argue that the simplest explanation is often the correct one: Söring committed the murders, and his later recantation is an attempt to rewrite history. Elizabeth's role remains equally ambiguous. By pleading guilty as an accessory, she avoided a full trial for murder, which means that many details of her involvement were never fully examined in court. Her relatively consistent narrative lends her some credibility, but it also raises questions about whether she has withheld information or shaped her story to minimize her own responsibility. The possibility of a third party introduces yet another layer of uncertainty. The unidentified DNA found at the scene suggests that someone else may have been present during the murders. This could indicate an accomplice, an unknown intruder, or even contamination of the evidence. Without definitive answers, this aspect of the case continues to fuel speculation. Over the years, documentaries, books, and investigative reports have revisited the Haysom murders, each offering new interpretations and theories. Some portray Söring as a victim of a flawed justice system, while others reinforce the original narrative of guilt. The case has become a Rorschach test for true crime enthusiasts, with interpretations often reflecting broader beliefs about justice, psychology, and the reliability of confessions. What makes this case particularly compelling is the absence of a clear, definitive truth. Unlike many criminal cases where evidence and testimony converge to form a coherent narrative, the Haysom murders remain fractured. Each version of events contains elements of plausibility, yet none fully account for all the known facts. At its core, the mystery revolves around a simple but unanswerable question: who really killed Derek and Nancy Haysom? Was it Jen Söring, driven by love and obsession, as the courts concluded? Was it Elizabeth Haysom, manipulating those around her and shifting blame to protect herself?